Hello and welcome back to another live episode of the Tackling Sport podcast. I'm your host Sean Hussey. Joined alongside me is my brother Daniel. Daniel, how are you getting on?
Yeah, keep him well, Sean.
And I suppose a magic special weekend in GA, the longest running All Ireland streak in the men's side. Dublin, they're six in a row, won't be seven. And Mayo, after nine years, have finally beaten Dublin again in the championship in the men's.
Yeah, 45 games, and the streak has ended. The likes of Brian Fenton and John Small have never lost a championship game, as well as obviously all the other players that have gone. But yeah, I just didn't expect it to happen in those circumstances. The fact that Dublin were playing keep ball essentially for the majority of the game, yet and Mayo were out of it, yet Mayo ended up winning the game. It was extraordinary, and Sean, we were obviously on the hill watching it, so watching it back was a bit different. But I think the general consensus, it was the game was over at half time. The game was over after 40 minutes, and even with 8 minutes to go, there's still 5 points in it. So while Dublin were a tad sloppy in that second half, you were thinking they had this in the bag. And then for Mayo to turn it around, the only way you could describe it, it's just Mayo. Like, there's no other team that could come back from that deficit, considering Dublin were playing keep ball. They just looked comfortable. And massive credit goes to James Horan. While I actually think he got a lot wrong in terms of the way he set up the start, playing sweeper, they didn't really kind of go at Mayo or at Dublin. Sorry, I did feel that his subs changed the game towards the end. And yeah, Jesus, it's amazing how that run's ended. Again, an All-Ireland semi-final in the rain after extra time is not really how you picture it. But I think full credit goes to Mayo and James Horan, and they're into an All-Ireland final now. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think the thing with Mayo is, I think last year might have, I suppose, given the Mayo fans a little bit of hope, because I think for a lot of them hope was lost after 2019 and Dublin completing the five in a row, and especially this year with all the retirements and you looking, I suppose, at a glance at the Mayo side, you wouldn't have been as confident as maybe 3 or 4 years ago when they had all those outstanding players and experienced players. And maybe this is the new Mayo side to come, and if they can break the hurdle of winning the first All Ireland since '51, I know it's going to be a massive ask against either Kerry or Tyrone, which we'll get on to in a few minutes. But this Mayo side is different. It just feels a younger, less baggage, and the outstanding performances on the day came from probably a few of their lesser known players. Guys who haven't been there for the last 10 years, and guys who weren't there in 2012.
Well, like, everyone talks about Dublin's All-Ireland medals gone, and that's particularly true. But like, Mayo have lost a serious amount of experience in the retirements, and Tom Parsons and Donny Vaughan, Killian O'Connor's injury kind of put, like, infamously now, Pascal said they've no chance of winning an All-Ireland because of Killian O'Connor. But like you said, some of the unheralded names like Enda Hessian, I thought was amazing when he came on, just number 19 for Mayo, because he just had the ball all the time. He was a runner. He was brilliant. I thought Matthew Ruan really stepped up against Brian Fenton. Now, while he didn't like dominate Fenton, I don't think anyone ever has. He was just always there, started the game well and kept going at a consistent level. So Mayo finally have a really strong midfielder there. And obviously, like, the two obvious names, the two man of the matches from RT and Sky, which is a bit of a weird one, but Lee Keegan winning Sky one and Padraig O'Hora winning the RT one. And I thought Padraig O'Hora was amazing. The job he did on Kieran Kilkenny, but Lee Keegan is just phenomenal footballer still. And I think his demise has been greatly exaggerated. Mainly, when I say demise, I don't think people in the media were saying it, but geez, listen to a few people today. It seems that James Horan seems to have him in full back a lot of the time. And when the shackles were released on Lee Keegan in that second half and extra time, he was just everywhere. And that score he got into the Davin stand in extra time, I think it was extra time, wasn't it, second half? It was absolutely incredible. The roar of the place, it was goosebump stuff. And Lee Keegan, like, Mayo suddenly have an amazing team. And the big question, Sean, like, when Aidan O'Shea got taken off, in my head, I was like, they've raised the white flag here. Or it's almost that we've run out of ideas. Let's just take Aidan O'Shea. He's not having a good game. I couldn't comprehend how you can make that decision. And yet, it worked. And to a point where now you're thinking, for an All-Ireland final, 4 weeks to prepare, does Aidan O'Shea, the captain, and not just captain, a talisman, a leader that's been in every single All-Ireland final Mayo played in the last few years, All-Ireland semi-final replays against Kerry, against Dublin. Is he going to start now in this Mayo team, or does he suit this Mayo team? So James Horan, there's a lot of positives, and mainly because they've so much to work on with that Dublin game, because I thought that at times they were very sloppy. I thought at times, particularly that first 40, 50 minutes, they didn't really compete with Dublin. So they have a lot to work on. But it's like you said, it's amazing how they won. I still can't get over the comeback yet. They fully deserved it towards the end, especially in extra time.
Yeah, I think the thing that will shocked a few people. They almost did a Dublin-like performance in that second half with the impact some of their subs had, but their ruthlessness in front of goal. There was a point Darren Cohen kicked, I think it was in the second half, which was under the Cusack stand, which was just you struggle to find a better strike of a ball all year in the football championship, and that's almost what Dublin have relied on. There was a year where Conor Costello, I think, came on and kicked 3 or 4 points. Tommy Conroy had that brilliant end to the into the second half of normal time and then kicked on in extra time as well. So they just seem to have something different. You mentioned then the Heston there. James Carr came on. Now he kicked a wide, but I think he got a score as well. And the likes of Jordan Flynn and just all these younger guys they seem to bring on. It's almost as if it's like Dublin a few years ago when Dublin were bringing on, your own Merchants, your Clowns, people like this to close out a game. And I just think Mayo, I just think if they get over the hurdle in whatever 4 weeks' time or whatever it turns out to be, I think it could be massive for them going forward because they almost as if they have the right age profile for players. You think of Limerick a couple of years ago when Limerick won their first All-Ireland in the hurling, they had a lot of players in and around the 22, 23, 24 age bracket where you almost need to win one. And you look around and the guys in the group go, well, this is not easy, but we can do this. And you look at the age profile, and I think that's what makes a lot of the Limerick guys brilliant. And yes, towards the end of, you had that Limerick team had the likes of Shane Dell and people like Casey and all this coming towards the end of their career. And it's almost as if that mash is there with Mayo at the moment. Now, the hardest thing for Mayo is and what might suit them is that extended break to get over the mental barrier of beating Dublin and the effort that went into that and extra time and everything that is the energy that comes with that, because they're going to have to play a completely different game against a side like Kerry, who they might have to outscore a little bit more than what they had against Dublin. But for me, I think that's the most interesting part for Mayo at the moment is they have the right mash of youth and experience and guys who've Lee Keegan and Aidan O'Shea and people like that who've carried the flag for so many years. Rob Hendy, who had a super game, and all of a sudden they've got guys coming off the bench like Flynn and Hessian, and all of a sudden they've the right age profile. And I think it's so important for them now that they get the next 2 or 3 weeks right. I think it's been said so often about the most important part of the All-Ireland final is the week before, and making sure you get everything in place ready for your 4 or 5 days before the All-Ireland, where your preparation is key. But I think that's just something to watch out for, Dan. I'm not sure what your take is on some of the guys that brought off the bench.
Well, it was a good comparison just on Limerick, and if you think back to the 2018 All-Ireland semi-final against Cork, their Nicky Quaid intervention away from losing that. So it just shows you you need that small bit of luck or that small moment in the game to get over a line. And if that moment was anything, it was Diarmuid O'Connor, incredible flick to get that 45 going wide into Kevin McLaughlin's hands straight over the bar, and it's incredible momentum all of a sudden. But one thing I might get lost as well a small bit, the All-Ireland final last year was played behind closed doors. Now going into the final water break, the sides were level and Dublin's bench won it, and in fairness they had Paul Mannion and Brian Howard coming off the bench, albeit Brian Howard was on at half time. But you cannot underestimate the Mayo fans in Croke Park and the lift they give their team. If you listen back to that clip where Kevin McLaughlin gets that point from Diarmuid O'Connor's intervention, it brings the score from 5 points to 4 points. In the grand scheme of things, it's not the most important, or it's not the biggest score of all time. The roar in that stadium, and you're kind of thinking, is there a game on here? So I think that madness of Mayo fans, and they'll outnumber Kerry 2-1, I'm sure of it, in the All-Ireland final. That's a guarantee. They just will. Like they nearly outnumbered the Dubs, and sure, the Dubs are only up the road. Like, you know what I mean? They just managed to get their hands on tickets. Every Mayo fan wants to be there. But in terms of what you said, I think that Limerick comparison is good, and mainly because, like I said, they need that. Sometimes you need luck to get over the line. They have that bit of youth, and even someone like Padraig O'Hora, who's not like young. I think he's 27, but he's kind of like come onto the scene now. He's so fit. He'll stay with. He's the man for David Clifford, I think, if Kerry do get through. Like, there's still going to be so many good battles. Like, do they put Lee Keegan on. I don't want to get too into this, Paddy Clifford, or, it's just a lot of great matchups. But last thing on Mayo, fair play to them. Delighted they managed to get a win. Delighted it was Mayo that beat the Dubs as opposed to, Kerry coming through. I think they deserve that. And I think the fact it's a 4-week break is because I know we spoke a lot in the podcast about teams celebrating semi-final victories. I think the Villa in the playoff semi-final, is it Villa or Derby? I'm thinking of Sean, or whoever
Villa,
it is.
Derby,
yes. Celebrating like they won, but they had 4 days for that final, or maybe 10 days max. But Mayo have the 4 weeks, and I think it's the best thing for them, because if they knew they're playing in 2 weeks, it's tough to get off that high and back on it. But like you said, the prep before All-Ireland finals can be crucial.
But I do think, like, and the one thing I had is, especially even being in Croke Park when it was announced the Dublin subs, there was never one that I really wanted on. Maybe if anyone was Cullen Basquel, and like it didn't work from in the second half. Eventually got black carded.
But even Conor Lane, Sean, you said a few weeks ago that maybe there was a mistake made, that Dublin as a county hasn't pushed him through, that he's coming on in that cauldron atmosphere without that inter-county experience. And we'll get onto the cards in a sec. It's a harsh black card, it is, but I don't think a more experienced player puts himself in that position, and that's a little bit harsh in Conor Lane, because I don't think it was a black, but he's put himself in that position with that little bit of inexperience.
Yeah, and even like someone like Cormac Costello, who's always had this role off the bench, like I can't remember him starting a bigger game for Dublin, really, because he's always been in the shadow of Dean Rock as someone who can take frees, and he's kind of been molded into the super sub, and that was probably one of the bigger games of his starting wise for his Dublin career, and it never really happened for him. He never really got on the ball. I'm not sure what his role is, and I almost feel as if Paddy Small, who was probably one of Dublin's better forwards, who kicked a couple of points, is probably better suited in there, maybe more than a wing forward. So that's going to be something for Dublin going forward. But definitely the Dublin bench just didn't have that impetus, and be interesting to see next year someone like Sean Bugler. I'd like to see him maybe from the start. I know he got a point in extra time, I think it was, but that is just something for Dublin to look at going forward. I think, Dan, you wanted to have a look at some of the bigger talking points maybe from the game, and some of the, I suppose, refereeing decisions made by Conor Lane. And I thought, I meant to say it to you watching the game, but at one stage when he blew his whistle, I just thought, geez, imagine how hard it is to referee a game at this pace in those conditions where you have to add a little bit of leniency, otherwise you could be black carding everyone, which I think the Davy Byrne decision might fall into. But you're so on your own there. So I'm just wondering, from your refereeing background, what you thought of Conor Lane's performance, and is it hard because of the conditions that you have to be that little bit more lenient, or is it just the rules are the rules?
Well, just to give like a context, like I just referee, I mainly play, so referee whenever I can. So you'd be kind of never at a serious level, intermediate or junior. But I remember reffing the 14 Fela hurling final 2017-ish, and there must have been maybe maximum 100 people in Parnell Park. And I had a good amount of experience at that stage, 6-7 years. And I remember just blowing it for an early free, and I heard a kind of groan or a roar of the crowd, and it hits you straight away. And for those that haven't played in front of a stadium, let alone referee in front of a stadium, when you referee every decision, and again, it was a failure, so this is very low ball stuff in terms of what's coming from the crowd. Yeah, I felt under huge pressure. So we always have to give a bit of context in terms of how much pressure these referees are under. It was a big occasion for Conor Lane. He has plenty of experience, but unfortunately, I do think he kind of lets too much go, and I think he's in the kind of book of Mar Stegan style of refereeing, where he kind of lets too much go, and you end up in these mess where a lot of these decisions aren't dealt with. Now, the John Small incident, right? As soon as it happened, Sean, I understand people might not have thought it was a foul, but straight away, Owen McLaughlin hit his head on the ground. There's a head injury. It's a terrible look for Gaelic football and an Irish sport in the middle of Croke Park that we left a man just lying on the ground and played on. And I think it was it Pascal had the goal chance then to make it 7. That's inconsequential, but in terms of the safety. But I mean, if that went in, the game's over. It's 7 points, and it's a different result, all because Conor Lane didn't blow the whistle. And I understand heat of the moment, it goes away, but Mar Stegan was on the linesman, and he he pushed in his chest, which means you're turning on your mic. And according to what was said, or just reading between the lines, I think he said it was shoulder to shoulder to play on. So you've two very experienced officials looking at Owen McLaughlin lying on the floor with a head injury. And I don't think James Horan was pissed off that there wasn't a red card given. In his interview, he was pissed off that the game wasn't stopped. And I think that's a non-negotiable for a referee. And it was a poor look for the sport that we kind of left the lad sit there. And of course, he ended up having a broken jaw. In terms of the tackle itself, I haven't heard anybody on the Sunday Game or any other podcast platform quoting the rules, which is very important because Sunday Game have a massive platform. It takes 2 seconds to put up the rules. So, a casual watcher goes, I know what to watch out for next time. So the 3 rules are, well, firstly, it has to be shoulder, shoulder, shoulder. It has to be side to side, shoulder to shoulder. But in terms of the cautions, if you do mistime it, so you can either get shoulder to chest, which is like a tick, or charge to the chest, and then you get a rough play, which is a yellow card, or if you endanger the safety of your opponent, it's a red card. And that definitely went into the endangering the safety of the opponent. I think that's pretty clear. But I think the rules need to be quoted like that because it's not fair on any other referee going in and quoting rules, yet nobody knows the rules. Do you know what I mean? But Conor Lane definitely got that first one wrong. It was a red card. I don't know what you made of it, Sean, but I did tap you in the shoulder straight away going, we've a man sitting there and we're in Dublin in for a goal. This is an absolute joke.
Yeah, the one about a red card or not, I think that's it. I'm not qualified to say it. I do think you're right. I think the head injury and just the sheer force of the impact, and I think it hit when you saw the ambulance come on straight. That's the quickest I've seen an ambulance caught on to the pitch in Croke Park. So I think, yeah, the severity of it, the hit. I think the fact you could see it lining up and it was almost a blind. He walked into a blind alley. It was a poor pass the way he was given to him. I'm not sure whether it's a red card or not, like 100% red card. It probably is. I don't like this whole the slow-mo idea and the picking up the player, and this is an amateur sport after all, and I don't like that. None of this stuff was maybe said about. I think it was Richie Hogan who got sent off in an All-Ireland final. People weren't getting as personal as maybe they were with some of the stuff about John Small, which I don't think is fair. But it's a difficult one because it's such a big playing area, and you've got one referee, you've got 2 linesmen and 4 umpires, and it almost is. And I've been saying it for a while for some of those bigger games in Croke Park, and it's going to be hard with the rules, but it's almost as if they need an extra pair of eyes. Now, I'm not for 1 minute saying any sort of video refereeing, but I do think there almost has to be something else there. Because it's so difficult and the pace of the game is being played at. It's just maybe a discussion for another day, but certainly one of the bigger talking points was that, and you never like coming out of a game where so much had happened in the game that, first of all, Dublin didn't deserve to win it, and you almost have a few different stories coming out of it, all this and the refereeing, and I think you have to give full credit to Mayo as opposed to anything else that happened. But
just on the last thing on the John Small though, watching it back or even live, it's not rough play. While he hasn't intentionally gone to hit him at shoulder and in the head, he has endangered the safety of the opponent. So it is a red card. However, I would completely agree with you that a lot of the stuff online is very personal to John Small, and it's pretty nasty stuff. And I think that's just the world we live in with social media, but it's not nice. And professional footballers are one thing, and again, everyone's human, but these are amateur players and these are amateur officials making these decisions. These referees aren't paid, these linesmen aren't paid, they don't have slow-mos,
The thing on that endangering the safety of it, or whatever that is, I know it's a footballing kind of line, but when the game's played at that much pace with that wet conditions, with everything like that, almost feel like you could make a judgment for a lot of things being endangering the safety of an opponent. There was that strike by Garrod Hegarty last year and Joe Canning that now it was a little bit accidental. I think it was the All-Ireland semi-final hurling, and you could make a case for that being a red card, even though a lot of people wouldn't have it a red card. So that's a difficult line to cross. Now we will move on to, I suppose, a more pressing matter certainly in Dublin, and one of the big talking points coming out of it, it's not been a good year for Dessie Farrell. I think everyone understands that, what's happened with COVID, what's happened with the COVID training, him having a 12-week ban at the start of the season, which a lot of people seem to forget. and I think it was Ken Robinson who was fronting up, and I don't even think he was giving media interviews at the start of the league campaign. So it's been a bit of a problem for Dublin. It hasn't been smooth sailing. It's very unlike Dublin GA of the last 10 years, certainly maybe of the 10 or 15 years before that. It was a little bit more common. It was a little bit less professional, but the last 10 years, Dublin GA have got a lot of things right, especially in the men's football side. But there has been a few cracks this year with Dessie Farrell, with a lot of uncertainty around players like Stephen Cluxton, Kevin McManaman, guys who we haven't seen a lot of, Keane O'Sullivan. But I think the 12-week ban at the start of the season might have just been a little bit of a turning point, and it's almost that invincibility of maybe Dublin has started to just steep away. And a lot of people are asking, is Dessie Farrell, who has won an All-Ireland now as a player and as a manager for his county, but is it fair after the year he's had for him to be given another year? Is that something maybe the county board are going to look at, Daniel? Do you think?
I do think it's one of those where if you give Dessie Farrell another year, you'll end up being here this time next year wondering why you gave Dessie Farrell another year. You know, like I have huge respect for Dessie Farrell and what he's achieved, particularly as a player, but as a management on the underage structures, I thought he was the right man to take over from Jim Gavin. Nobody wants that job to be taken from a 5-in-a-row champions, while everyone wants that squad, a bit like Manchester City in the Premier League. The pressure on that job was enormous, and he took it at last minute. Remember when Jim Gavin was only made his decision start of 2020, a couple of months before lockdown. So, and with COVID and everything, it's been a disaster in terms of managing and all that. But I do think everything went their way last year in the All-Ireland. Like, you know, they didn't have to play any team till the final. They played Mayo with James Horan, and it just starting out, and not just starting out in his first season with Mayo, but a first season with Mayo where it's knockout championship, so they don't even have a Super 8s to get going, if you know what I mean. So they were kind of gifted last year's All-Ireland. I think Kerry kind of made a mess of that. That would have been a better game. So, but listen, Dublin won it. But the warning signs for me on Dessie Farrell's reign actually started in that final when Brian Howard and Paul Mannion, which I referenced earlier, didn't start the final. Now, they were the best, two of the Dublin's best 4 or 5 players the previous season. There just seemed no logical reason for those 2 players to be dropped. And it seemed to me, this might be a tad harsh, but it seemed to me that Dessie was almost trying to make subs for the sake of making subs, which is what, or make changes to the All-Ireland team, which is why Robbie McDade started the final. I kind of had question marks from there, and it's just been a disaster this season. And it all started with that COVID training breach. Now, don't want to spend too long talking about the COVID training breach, but it's easy now to think, it was blown out of proportion, all that. At the time, we were in a serious lockdown situation where I don't think it was kind of fair for anybody to be out training. It was that kind of environment, and for Dublin players to do that, seemingly with a split in the camp about it, it's just been downhill since then. And they were poor in the National League. They were very poor in the Leinster Championship, and the writing was on the wall from a very early stage. Now, saying all that, Dublin had the game won against Mayo. They were 10-3 up just before half-time. But I nearly think that's a worse situation. The fact is, I still think that Dublin squad is good enough to beat Kerry 100%. But the way they're playing at the moment and the way they pass the ball for the sake of passing, Kieran Kilkenny kicks the score after 2 minutes and 57 seconds of keeping the ball, and that's great. You spend 3 minutes, you had the ball and you scored. Yet I was only thinking there this morning what happens if you manage to get 3 or 4 scores in that time. Do you know what I mean? And I just think Dublin have lost the buzz of playing. They've gone from really attacking football in 2014, and Jim Gavin brought it along, got the balance right, where now they've kind of don't know where the balance is. And like Niall Scully, he's just not playing with freedom. There's a lot of other players not playing with freedom. But like Conor Lane, he wasn't moving, Sean. We were saying and watching the game live, he wasn't making those runs that he normally makes. The Brian Fenton one, it wasn't in the first half. Dublin were winning the game by 5 or 6 points. Brian Fenton catches a mark, turns to kick it to Conor Callahan, and he's not making a run in the Davin. So instead, Brian Fenton has to kick it all the way back. And it just, again, Dublin were doing enough and winning it like this, but that wouldn't have been good enough to beat Kerry in the final, and it won't be good enough to beat Kerry or Mayo now, who I think won't fear the Dubs anymore, and that's Sky and Excel. So I just think with the Stephen Cluxton situation, Eric Lenz walks away from the panel. Paul Mannion's playing the football of his life, apparently in the league for Kilmacud Crokes. Yet he's not involved with the Dubs. So there's a lot of question marks to Dessie Farrell. That me personally, I think someone else should have the job or should be allowed to have the opportunity to have the job. But again, I do think he'll probably be given another year to work with the players. But if you want to have the likes of Mannion back, if you want to possibly have Cluxton back to win his 9th All-Ireland, although I did think Evan Cummerman played played excellence, that you've got to go with another manager, which is my kind of reason for saying that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think it's been a year to forget for Dublin GA, and I think all great empires have to fall, and that's what this Dublin team have done for the last 10 or so seasons since they won their first All-Ireland in 2011 as a group, and obviously there's only a couple of them still left. The one thing that I think annoyed me was the way Dublin lost. Certainly, it felt as if Dublin went out on a whimper. When you look back at the game, there were so many uncharacteristic mistakes from Dublin that if you are going to play this sort of possession-based game and slow build-up, especially in Gaelic football, you can't give away easy possession. And I think you'd have to count on two or three hands how many times that happened to Dublin. Getting caught in possession. The Lee Keegan score came from a really bad kick pass from Niall Scully, because Niall Scully was boxed in front of the hill there at the Cusack stand side in the opposition's 13 or 21, and he takes a risky 40-yard kick backwards outside of the boot, and he loses it.
I think it was 3-on-1.
Yeah, and I can't remember. I can't remember a time seeing that from a Dublin team before. The McCarthy guy held in possession, Colin Basquel a couple of times. Even the subs, when they came on, gave away the ball. So that has always been my biggest gripe with Dublin over the last 10 years. I just think if the one thing, their inside forward line, for as good a players they have, I don't think we get the most out of. I think you look at someone like Paddy Small, who a lot of the time for his club, Nafino or whatever, absolutely for Ballymun, sorry, destroys defenders in the county championship, and he's kind of played a different role for Dublin. He's someone who pops on the ball and can kick a score from anywhere. But I'd like to almost see him deployed as an inside forward and see, can he beat his man one-on-one. And that's probably what saved Dublin in the last couple of years, is Conor Callahan's ability to do that. And I think he's got Dublin out of a few holes by kicking, 1-3, 1-4 in a big game when Dublin needed it. You think of those goals in his breakthrough year against Mayo and Tyrone. But that just didn't happen on Saturday night. And when it doesn't happen, Dublin don't necessarily kick a lot of scores if Con doesn't get scores. Dean Rock, who has been a brilliant player for Dublin, never really kicks more than 2 or 3 points in play, and I actually thought he was one of Dublin's better players on Saturday. Kieran Kilkenny goes in and out of games a little bit too much for a scoring point of view. Now Scully can chip in with a goal, but he's never been a massive scorer. So that has to be an area of concern for Dublin going forward with Dessie Farrell. And I think next year with a full league campaign, obviously the disruption with him, you don't know how much that 12-week ban affected the players or the whole structure to Dublin, because that has to be noted as well. But I do think he'll get another year. But the pressure
I'll ask you the question: do you think he'll win Can he win another All-Ireland?
Yeah, of course he can. I think he can. I think
I don't.
Do you not?
I can't see. I think the bridges have been burned too much with a lot of the senior. And it was just James McCarthy. Like I've never seen him lose the head like he did towards the end, and I don't think that happens under a different manager, let alone a Jim Gavin or someone similar.
I do think that look, it hasn't been an easy year. I think he'll get given another year. I don't necessarily think he can't win one. I think the players there, I think that they're more than capable of winning the All-Ireland next year.
Do you think that squad is though, without Paul Mann and Stephen Cluxton? Yeah. Look at that bench, Sean.
Yeah,
will they be Kerry or Mayo next year?
The bench is the problem, right? There is a couple of players maybe coming from the under-20s, not a whole heap, not as much as there was a few years ago, which is a concern for Dublin. You haven't looked at some of the performances of the Dublin under-20s in the last year or so. There's only a handful of guys there, and a few of them will have a decision to make over whether they play into county hurling or football for Dublin. But I do think Dessie could easily win an All-Ireland next year. It's not going to be easy. I think the next 3 or 4 months are big for Dublin, although they won't play a game really till the start of January, February, or the O'Byrne Cup comes along. I think they need to quash a few of the rumours that are flying around the Dublin GA circles, because it's not helping anybody.
One thing I will say, the likes of Fenton, like the three of the best 4 players in the country right now are Brian Fenton, Conor Callahan, and Kieran Kilkenny. That's a fact, and David Clifford in there Not in form, maybe obviously Paddy Clifford, but just in general in terms. So those 3 players are phenomenal. So of course Dublin, couldn't be so motivated, but they're only 3 players. And the fact is that bench under Dessie Farrell will be more or less the same squad next year, bar a couple of under 20s. The couple of Pascal brothers might have more experience, but by and large, that bench will not be good enough to beat Kerry or Mayo next year, let alone what Tyrone or Donegal if they can improve. Which is why I do think that a new manager will give the chance to maybe open the door back to a Paul Mannion, who I think if Dublin had Paul Mannion on Saturday, they would have won the game. I think it's that simple. I don't know if like one extra forward, even if they had Paul Mannion coming off the bench, I think that's the game. You win it by 1 or 2 points. Remember, it was only 1 point extra they needed. So they were one really good player away from beating Mayo, I think. And they didn't have that. But the reason they didn't have that is whatever's been going on behind the scenes and lads leaving panels for various reasons. And Stephen Cluxton thing that wasn't handled very well, no matter what way you look at it, no matter what other scenarios they are. It hasn't been handled very well with Dessie. And I do think Jim Gavin and other managers speak a lot better in the press. And I think that's important for a situation like the Stephen Cluxton that just wasn't cleared up. But look, I do personally think Dessie Farrell will be given another year. I just think we'll be here this time next year wondering why some other manager wasn't given the opportunity to work with these group of players. But I would say, they won't win an All-Ireland. The likes of Fenton, Con, Kilkenny, James McCarthy will really want to go again, you think, anyway. Well, and last thing, I think is Johnny Cooper was the captain, wasn't he? He's a Nafina man. Dessie's a Nafina man. I don't know. If I'm in there, Geraldine Moran's man, and I've got Geraldine Moran's as the best captain, Geraldine Moran's player is the best captain for Dublin, I'm not picking him as captain. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know. There's a few things very simplistic to look at, but
well, I don't know if I'd agree with that one. But anyway, we'll move on to the Dublin. We'll move on to the rest of the GA. I think a big candidate potentially for the Dublin men's job is the Dublin ladies manager McBone, and they had a brilliant win over Mayo. And there's some other great results. I suppose one of the big games was Roscommon Offaly in the under-20 final. Dan, if you watched any of it, but I saw Shane Lowry was enjoying Offaly's win and their rise again.
Well, I turned it on. I don't know what I was expecting to see in Croke Park, but I wasn't expecting the atmosphere, the amount of fans there. I actually don't know what the attendance was, but it was a double header with the ladies, which is another brilliant idea from the GA and the LGFA. But yeah, it was a fantastic game. 2 really good teams. After watching Dublin-Mayo, which again was very exciting, but it wasn't like the most attacking game in the world. Do you know what I mean? And Mayo as well as Dublin kept the ball for large parts of the game, passing around. Where Offaly and Roscommon, there was almost an innocence of youth to it, but it wasn't the case that there was no defending going on. It was just one-on-one battles, the way Gaelic football will be played. And I'll never be an advocate of the shot clock ever, but I would say if it does carry on the way Doves were doing it for large spells, you'd have to somewhat consider that, because it was just so fast. Offaly, Roscommon, brilliant. 2 great teams, and Offaly's first All-Ireland under-20 title since 1988, I think, and their first All-Ireland since 1998 in any code. So it's a fantastic achievement for Offaly, and I know I don't think the investment from Shane Lowry has had that impact on under-20 team yet in terms of the money or what's been going on. I think the lift it's given a county, you can't quantify that. So it's been fantastic. I think Michael Daigan, who has really stepped up, a lot of lads chirping from the sideline about what their county board should be doing. He said, I'm going to run the county board, and he got enough backing in the county. He brought Shane Lowry in with a phone call, or between the two of them during one of the hurling finals. It's just a great story. And one thing just to tie in the ladies football with that I mentioned, that the ladies football, if you look at Meath, right? So Meath ladies team, they lost the 2018 and the 2019 intermediate finals before winning the 2020 intermediate final, and now they're in senior, and they're in the senior All-Ireland final. Yet Offaly and Roscommon don't have that opportunity within the All-Ireland yet. I know they're looking at other formats, but I do think could easily be as simple as 3 tiers: junior, intermediate, senior, and make it more appealing, so Offaly can kind of put their under-20s in their senior team and they go, let's win junior this year, or let's go, and Roscommon can go, let's compete in intermediate, because that's the level those counties are at, as opposed to they might get lost in that 21 to 24-year-old bracket when they're playing against Dublin in a Leinster Championship or whatever. So yeah, if we can take anything from this weekend, let's, the LGFA, they're there's a lot of stuff going on in the LGFA at the moment. I know the underage All-Irelands aren't being played yet, which is important to note that they should be played. They haven't been played in the men's, but what they are doing right is the grading systems, and I think that should be brought into the GA. But Shane Larry, brilliant pictures, fantastic, and you love to see it. It's amazing. Brilliant story.
Absolutely, and I think you're right there. And that Meath win over Cork sets up a mouth-watering final in a couple of weeks' time. It's hard to keep up with when the games are, with the hurling and the Kerry Tyrone, which we won't even get into. We'll have a quick discussion on the Premier League. Obviously, it's opening weekend. Couple of big results, couple of shock results. I know one of our resident Tottenham fans,
resident Tottenham fans,
would have been delighted with Tottenham's win over Man City. I don't think a lot of people would have seen that. There was Brentford over Arsenal, but I suppose we might touch on maybe Paul Pogba and his performance for Manchester United and their performance overall, scoring 5 against Leeds United. At a packed Old Trafford, the feel-good factor's back with United. Ollie's at the wheel. Varane is in. Sancho is in, and they look set for a really big season.
Yeah, I wasn't sold on United, and it just in terms like not winning a title, I think put them 4th in the league, which, in some ways I might stand by. But I think going into the season, while I've always been a massive Mason Greenwood fan, I definitely underestimated his abilities at number 9. And I think Ollie stumbled upon a really good formation there that he played against Leeds. Now, Leeds did kind of fall apart in terms of when the second goal went in, it was 2-1. And, you could argue there's probably no better team to play in the Premier League in terms of the way they play. They just can't seem to change it when to, slow the game down. But Mason Greenwood at 9, Bruno at 10, and Paul Pogba off the left. And you had Jadon Sancho light there and Dan James on the right wing. So just wait till the Jadon Sancho goes into that team. And I think that's your front four for a lot of games this season. I really, really do. And you could play Fred and McTominay there and they protect the back four. And then when you do have Varane in with Maguire, maybe you can look and try and maybe put Rashford left and maybe Pogba there. But I do think that front four, and then bring Cavani on with 20 minutes to go if it's not working for Greenwood. It's just so many options. And we've always talked about the United have a squad to compete for a title, where I think now Ollie deserves a bit of credit because he's managed to get these players in the right positions, albeit this is one game. But I just took that game. I was very stubborn thinking that they're not playing that well, but on reflection, they were absolutely amazing. And Mason Greenwood was class. Paul Pogba got 4 assists, strolled around the place, best player on the pitch. It was a incredible performance. He was off the left, a lot of the times he'd be inside, but he also kept the width as well. It was just pretty simple. And Bruno didn't do much. He just kind of played really well. And then he's getting 2 goals. Do you know what I mean? It was, if you're a United fan, I'd be pretty excited. And the excitement, in fact, that you've got like Varane, one of the best centre-backs, going alongside Maguire. If they can get a centre mid before the window, they're definitely going to challenge for a title. But I do think the keeper and the midfield are the 2 questions around United, but that's been said a lot in places. But I would be fairly positive on Manchester United. I thought they were very, very good against Leeds.
And there was no Harry Kane for Tottenham?
No Harry Kane. The Harry Kane derby ended with, I don't think Harry Kane wanted that team to win. Just briefly on the match, like I thought Grealish, first 10, 15, 20 minutes, he looked lively. He was on the ball. He's playing like this left centre mid position. I was like, this is brilliant. City are amazing. Going to be amazing to watch. And Pep didn't seem up for it from there on. There just seemed to be something missing and they kind of kicked it away. But credit to Spurs and Nuno. Nuno deserves massive credit to, I think, Son. I think Son's expected goals, I heard before the game, are 0.6 per game when Harry Kane doesn't play and 0.3 when Harry Kane does. So it just shows you can build a small team around Son at Spurs. So I don't know, at 160 million, I'd probably be saying yes to selling Harry Kane. And I wouldn't be surprised if Daniel Levy did. But in terms of like City, onto like Graham Souness and Micah Richards and some of the stuff they were talking about after, like this clamour from Gary Neville to want Harry Kane. And I know you don't steal your point too much, Sean, but you brought this to my attention a few weeks ago saying, why is Gary Neville doing an interview with Harry Kane? And he just seems to have kicked that on in the overlap in the Sky Sports that he wants Harry Kane to leave and Harry Kane's within his rights not to turn up to training. I don't know. I think Micah Richards called Graham Souness out on his Paul Pogba thing and also Gary Neville on his Harry Kane thing. And for those that haven't seen the clip, do look it up, because I do think that Micah Richards kind of called it and saying, why are you lads, say, Souness not giving Pogba the credit deserves, and why is Harry Kane or why is Gary Neville so invested in Harry Kane leaving for Manchester City? It is a tad bizarre.
Yeah, it's I just think the whole thing it's just needless. I don't think it's helped Harry Kane's actual cause to leave. I think people might have a little bit more sympathy if he was almost trapped, couldn't say anything, the England captain, and he was almost being, left in the lurch by both Man City and Tottenham. I think the position Kane's in now is almost as if a lot of people have lost sympathy for him. If he kept his mouth shut and was caught in between, I think people would respect that more. I think there would be a lot of Tottenham fans out there who won't be happy with how it's played out and how it's played out in the public realm as well. I think if you're Nuno Espirito Santo, like you've got human son there. If you keep him and you get, what it's been linked about 100 odd million, and you can buy in one more player for Tottenham, I don't think you'd be throwing the toys out of your pram. I think you'd be thinking, yeah, I can work around this. I can work around human son and get one more in. Now that's the key. Can they get a quick in?
And
And if
who
City
as well.
and who that is the thing. Obviously, Spurs not having any European football of note. They're in the Conference League, might hamper them. But I don't necessarily. Just the way it's played out, I just doesn't. I don't think sit well. I think it's the sort of modern football approach. People talking in the media, whether it's your agent or your player. And Gary Neville's defended him, saying, "Look, he hasn't said he wanted to leave. You know, Harry Kane put a bounty on his head and said to Man City, come get me for 100 million. I think that would be a fair price. So he hasn't helped himself, Harry Kane, and it's been noticeable how quiet his camp have been in the last few weeks. I think if we get another week or 10 days into the window with not a long way left, I think we might hear a little bit more, and I think it'll get a little bit more ugly before it gets solved. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. We're definitely going to keep covering it. I suppose
Just
the
your thoughts
opening.
on before you do on Gary Neville very briefly on the
Well, look, I think the new overlap channel is good. I watched that debate with Roy
it's very
Keane and
good.
Carragher and stuff. But look, Gary Neville has a lot of vested interest in things when he does talk a lot. Obviously, as an owner of Salford, as someone who has tried to get his side back or get a side into the Premier League. I mean, that's the ultimate goal of a team like that. So, when he talks about agents and he talks about different things like that he's not happy with, I mean, he's talking with a particular hat on. Um, but I suppose we'll look at the other games in the opening weekend. I think if you're a Liverpool fan and you saw what happened to Man City, yes, you'd be worried about Chelsea and United, but having Virgil van Dijk back, and it was just a really comfortable afternoon for them. Jota getting in on the axe, Salah, Mane, minutes in the legs of Keita and Oxlade-Chamberlain. I think it's a pretty good weekend for them as well.
Yeah, I'm going to stand my prediction in the sense that I think City will still win it, but I really like Liverpool's chances of pushing them all the way, and I think they will finish second. It's just the Van Dijk factor. It just slotted in, like you said. It was a simple win. I only caught the highlights now. I didn't watch it live, but it just seemed to me that Salah's clicked into gear. 20 points on fantasy. Van Dijk's in. He's gone with Matip now instead of Gomez. That's interesting. They did that in pre-season as well. Should have seen the signs as I picked Gomez for draft, but look, I'm over that now. But it is that, they've kind of like kept it ticking over. Nothing mad, nothing like people say like their midfield isn't good enough to win the league. It was, 2 years ago. I know Genie's gone, but I'd be confident enough that Klopp, glasses Klopp now, we have to say. I think he had a lot of time over the summer to come up with a plan, and that finished the last season. Alisson scoring the goal, all this. They're just building on that momentum. 2 years ago, they won the league. There hasn't been fans in the stadium since. The Anfield factor will be back. They haven't even had a game in Anfield. Yeah, I like Liverpool's chances of really pushing Manchester City this year. So, which is why, and I think that experience of Liverpool and City going at it and having to win every week, albeit City losing there, which is a bit mad, but they have the experience of getting 3 points every single week and getting 90 plus points. These Chelsea and United teams, albeit much better than they were, say, 2 years ago, don't quite have that experience, which is why I think those two are just a little bit ahead of City and Liverpool, albeit I would close that gap maybe a point or two closer than I did in the predictions.
The one thing maybe you might say, Dan, is if you look at the Chelsea team who started, I think what's more noticeable for that is the players who didn't start. So their bench, for example, Tammy
True.
Abraham, who might be gone. You've got Kepa Arrizabalaga, who's one of the most expensive goalkeepers ever. Thiago Silva, Kurt Zouma, Hudson-Odoi, Chilwell. Then the three subs that came on, James, Havertz and Emerson. You add in Romelu Lukaku, you add in a couple more. I mean, Chelsea very much have all the ingredients. Like we spoke on the preview, maybe it's just a year too early or half a season too early for them. But Thomas Tuchel has what has in place for, I don't want to say sustained success for Chelsea, because that's never a thing with Roman Abramovich. You never get that time. But maybe the mold is starting to change at Chelsea, and the style of Tuchel, the fans not being in the stadium for the opening couple of games where it was difficult to watch. They've
Mm.
just found a way of clicking into gear, and 3-0 win, comfortable win against Palace.
Well, look, yeah, now I won't stay stubborn forever. As soon as I think Chelsea will overtake a Liverpool or City and win the league, I will call it. And in fairness, a lot of good points you make. The Romelu Lukaku factor is huge. Of course, he's making his debut against Arsenal next weekend. But yeah, I couldn't believe seeing the Chelsea team that Havertz wasn't playing. Do you know what I mean? Because Germany got knocked out in the last 16. I was very surprised at that. And I think when Lukaku's back, I think they'll find a way of having Havertz in the team. I'm not sure what's going to happen with Timo. So I suppose, talking myself into not having Chelsea in the top two would be that, that might take what's Chelsea's best team now. Even though Lukaku slots in, where's Havertz playing? Is he playing 10? Is he playing off the right? Is he playing off the left? Where's Timo going to play? Is Timo going to start? Where's Pulisic going to play? Is it going to be Kante and Jorginho then, and then the front four? Is that too much front four? Do you need Mason Mount in there, obviously? So they've so many options. Tuchel's got to get it right straight away, because remember, Manchester City and Liverpool are ready for 90-plus points this year, you'd assume. So Chelsea have to be that consistent. So I think what you said there was good. I think half a season too soon is probably about right, because I think they will click. Now, if Tuchel gets it right straight away, it's game on. There's no reason why they can't. They have a chance, absolutely. But I think that's just
the one thing I do say is I don't think, I might put out there, because of how many competitive teams there are, I don't think it's going to be as high scoring as maybe it has been, points wise. I do think there's teams out there, and there's a few difficult away grounds that I'm not sure we'll get to the level we have been. Now, I don't think it'll be, 75, 80 odd that win it, but I don't think it will be as sustained dominance from teams. Now, the City will go on a run, Liverpool will go on a run, Chelsea, United, where they get 7-8 wins in a row, but I don't necessarily, I think there's, you look at the top four teams, they're going to have to go to difficult grounds to win. They're going to have to play each other, which is
the each other thing I agree with, but you did say that top four is a lot more further.
Yeah, but what I mean by that
think there's more in that middle third that could get something off.
I just think you could name off 3 or 4 grounds that are going to be difficult to play. I think, for example,
Brentford.
You look at well, there's Brentford, but I think you look at Tottenham now. Anytime someone team has to go down and try and break down Nuno Espirito Santos, Tottenham, it's going to be difficult. You think of Villa are going to pick up points against one of those top 4 teams. I think with the players they have, when they click, if they click, they can get it right. There is your traditional Crystal Palace. Now maybe it won't be as difficult a place to go with Patrick Vieira. Wolves always seem to do well in big games. So I'm not sure it will be. I'm not sure. I think if someone gets over 93 points, they win the league. But I don't think we're going to have 100 or a 98 point or something. Like we think it will drop down 6 or 7 points. But that's all really we're going to cover this week on the podcast. It's been another busy weekend of sport. We didn't even get into a couple of different things.
Yeah,
but I'm sure.
Just say that the Irish men's basketball team won the European Championship for smaller countries, which I know on Virgin there earlier they were trying to get in, but we ran out of time. But it's important to know it's fair play to them. Great win over Malta. I know they won the bronze a few years ago, so our last time out. So yeah, massive win. But it just shows you. I do feel a tad. While we slated TV companies and League of Ireland coverage and stuff, it is tough to cover everything.
Absolutely, and I think there's a couple of good positive things to come out of the week. A couple of Troy Parrott scoring for MK Dons, albeit in a loss. Anthony Scully for Lincoln. So there's a few good stories to come out. I do think one we'll have to touch on is Wayne Rooney's derby is definitely something to keep an eye on.
Well, summarise it in 10 seconds for the listeners there, Sean.
Well, they were 1-0 up with Peterborough in extra time.
Sorry, again, I cut across you, but to tell the listeners that you chose to watch this match over United match and Leeds.
Yeah, we don't have BT here, so I didn't fancy streaming United. They were 3-1 up or whatever. But the last 10 minutes of the Peterborough derby game, it was actually Fergie time, because Alex Ferguson's son Darren is managing Peterborough, and they scored 2 goals in Fergie time to beat Derby. And Wayne Rooney is under the spotlight there. They've got Phil Jagielka on a short-term deal. Things have happened in the last few weeks that haven't been good for Wayne Rooney in his personal life with injuries. Ravel Marson's come in and got a goal against Salford in the Cup, but there's a long way to go for Wayne Rooney. And Derby, having been in the Premier League a while ago, have slipped. And anyone who has listened to the overlap, Roy Keane has spoken about this. Derby are in danger of becoming an Ipswich or becoming a Sunderland and getting stuck in A-League One, or even dropping further down to where Bolton are. I know Bolton got promoted last year, but it is a slippery slope for those teams to figure out. I suppose a bit of positive news, Dan, just quickly before we go, about Shamrock Rovers and their next round of the conference being televised.
Yeah, even better than I initially thought. So Virgin Media are covering the first leg. RT have come on board for the second leg, and a lot of abuse they're getting for doing the right thing. I always find that a little bit, lads. We've got not what we wanted. Yes, it shouldn't have happened. There should have been more coverage, but it's better than not showing the games again. So I think that's a tad rich to happen. Yeah, but fair play to the TV companies for coming on board. And of course, Virgin Media have the rights to the Europa Conference League group stage games, which means that Rovers should get through, or have a really good chance of getting through because they're in the Champions route. That's brilliant news for Irish football, brilliant news for League of Ireland and Shamrock Rovers fans. So yeah, look forward to that on Virgin Media. The first leg, I think, and RT the second.
Super. And make sure if you're listening that you haven't joined our Tackling Sport Podcast League, well, you're going to be up against it, because I'm 1,500 with 80 points, and the leader, I think, has got 129 points, but played as triple captain with Salah.
And it's funny you say that, Sean. Like, I went in, I think, 20 points over the average, and I went 789th in the league, and I went, all right, they haven't updated it yet. Went in an hour later, of course, figured it out, of course, that which is good though. But like, it's probably maybe 3 or 4 times more competitive than last year, but Doug Bell still won it last year. And my mate Doug Bell, and we have to present that United jersey. I have it for you, Doug, if you're listening. We'll present and get an all nice post on Instagram. But yeah, there is a chance. Stay with it.
Absolutely. So make sure to check us out on Tackling Sport. If you're new around here, please subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, get us on Facebook and on Instagram as well. And make sure to contact the show if you want anything discussed on the show, if you want to come on board for an episode soon in the coming weeks. But that's all from me. I was your host, Sean, alongside my brother Daniel. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sean.
And we'll see you next time. Take care.